All right, okay, great. Hi there, I'm Jeremy Nichols. I'm the Climate Energy Program Director for Wild Earth Guardians, and we're here doing our weekly Facebook Live check-in. Every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time, we do about a half an hour Facebook Live event, and we dive into the latest in terms of some of the campaigns that we're taking on right now. The Climate Energy Program for Wild Earth Guardians is working hard to confront the fossil fuel industry here in the American West, trying to keep oil, gas, and coal in the ground. We are also working to defend clean air, and our Facebook Live events give folks an opportunity to interact with us, bring questions, and to learn more about the work that Wild Earth Guardians Climate Energy Program is up to. So today, in case you missed it last week we did a great check-in on our campaign to permanently protect the Greater Chaco region from fracking. And it was a great event. Please check it out if you haven't already. It's available on our Facebook page. We're also going to be posting our videos to YouTube so that people can more easily share them and get them up on their websites too. So we got lots of great things going on. Today I have Becca Fisher with me. Becca's our Climate Energy Program attorney, and we're going to do a deep dive into our campaign to defend public lands from fracking. And this kind of, we had this idea because last week we had a federal court hearing in Montana. It was in a lawsuit that we filed challenging the sale of 150,000 acres of Montana for fracking in 2018. And these included lands on the doorstep of Yellowstone National Park, in southeast Montana's Tongue River Valley, and also next to the Upper Missouri River Breaks National Monument. And last week, our attorneys argued. Our attorneys were Laura King with the Western Environmental Law Center and Joel Miner with Earth Justice, and they made their case to federal judge Brian Morris in Great Falls, Montana. And the feedback was it seemed to go pretty well. It seemed like the judge was really receptive to our concerns. The gist of the case is basically that the Bureau of Land Management leased these lands without accounting for the full environmental implications of fracking, including the climate consequences and the potential for groundwater contamination. But really, this Montana case is just one piece of a broader campaign that Wild Earth Guardians is engaged in to confront the sale of public lands for fracking throughout the American West. We have litigation in New Mexico as well, and we have really been on the leading edge of trying to secure some degree of climate accountability within the federal government and in relation to the management of our public lands. So, Becca is leading the charge, and she is single-handedly, on behalf of Guardians, really, just playing an amazing role in confronting the Trump administration's oil and gas above all else policies. But I guess before we really get into the nuts and bolts of our campaign, Becca, I thought it would be great to start with some of the basics. Just tell us a little bit about oil and gas leasing on our public lands, just how it all works, and why it is such a big issue and why we've chosen to invest so much energy in confronting this practice.
Yeah, it's a really important issue, especially as Westerners. So, as you may know, the Department of Interior and the Bureau of Land Management, they manage for the American people a large swath of federal public lands and minerals, especially in the West. And these are supposed to be managed for multiple uses, for the future use of American people, as well as, recreation and all sorts of other things. But under the Trump administration, what we're seeing is these lands being solely used for Trump's energy dominance agenda. And so it's been an all-out war out here in the West in terms of the oil and gas front. And so the Bureau of Land Management has this whole process that they go through in order to open up these lands for leasing and for fracking ultimately. What they start out with were resource management plans, which are these broad overviews. Usually there's a couple per state, where they plan out which lands are available and open to oil and gas leasing. Unfortunately, the Bureau of Land Management frequently makes 90%, 99% of these lands open for oil and gas leasing with very few limitations.
Yeah, so right away, the management is completely imbalanced. Like, it's completely skewed for oil and gas development. So that's not necessarily unique to the Trump administration, but obviously the Trump administration has seized on that fact. Like, for example, in southeast New Mexico's Carlsbad field office, more than 98% of that area is open for oil and gas leasing. Mm-hmm. It's crazy.
And it's something we're seeing across the West. In Colorado, there's been some recent drafts of resource management plans going out, and it's full-on onslaught on our public lands. And so once the resource management plans are in place and approved, the Bureau of Land Management then will receive what are called expressions of interest from the oil and gas industry. So a couple things to note about this. Expressions of interest can be anonymous. So the industry can submit these. We have no idea as the American people who is nominating our public lands for fracking. And that's crazy to me.
It is crazy. So basically getting this whole process going, like getting to the point where the BLM is selling off our public lands for fracking can be started by a simple anonymous request by anybody.
Yeah, and in Nevada in particular, we've been seeing tons of anonymous nominations through these expressions of interest. And once the lease sale comes down, no one's actually buying them. So it's a completely speculative. It's a lot of bad actors. In Arizona, we've been seeing people banned from actually nominating anymore because they've failed to pay and they've been big actors. But BLM really just doesn't put any restrictions on this expression of interest stage for the most part.
Yeah, yeah, which is crazy. So you have these anonymous interests who can get the ball rolling on oil and gas leasing, and then at the end of the day, the sale of these lands, the leasing of these lands, commits them to oil and gas development, or basically commits them to oil and gas at the exclusion of all other uses. And that's the crazy thing here. Once an acre of our public land is sold to the oil and gas industry, companies can prohibit public access to the land. The lands can't be conserved. Wildlife habitat can't be protected. There's a whole slew of things that can't happen because it's public lands in name only, right? I mean, it's basically oil and gas can do whatever it wants. Oil and gas industry can do whatever it wants.
So it's kind of a wonky legal term, but I think it sums it up well. Irretrievable commitment of resources at the lease sale stage.
Don't forget that
There's
phrase.
There's no going back, no turning back once the Bureau of Land Management offers these lands for lease and they are bid upon and paid for. So our public lands are no longer our public lands at that point. They turn into industry's lands. And up for a period, lease terms generally last for about 10 years, generally. And then if the land is put in for production, it's about 40 to 50 years, depending on the life of the oil and gas well.
So it's pretty much an entire lifetime that these lands could be committed to the oil and gas industry.
Yeah, so these parcels that are being leased today, we may never have access to them as the American people.
So, knowing all this, it was actually back in around 2013, 2014 that Wild Earth Guardians decided, we have to start engaging at the oil and gas leasing stage, and we have to start trying to secure some degree of accountability to public health and the environment, and more importantly, the climate. It's interesting, there was an inventory of greenhouse gas emissions from oil and gas produced from public lands, and they account for around 10% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. So oil and gas from our public lands, 10% of all U.S. greenhouse gas emissions. It's huge, and it really underscores the need to get a handle on this process and start to rein in this program, start to slow and ultimately stop the sale of these public lands for fracking, basically keep it in the ground. And so back in 2013, around 2013, 2014, we said, enough, we have to stop this wholesale liquidation of our public lands for fracking. And so we started weighing in, commenting, and then filing administrative appeals, also called protests, challenging pretty much every lease sale that was proposed under the Obama administration. And we were working with other groups as well. We started showing up and protesting in person, delivering the message that it's time to keep it in the ground. It's time to stop the federal oil and gas leasing program. At the time, we also filed a petition calling on the Obama administration to impose a moratorium on new oil and gas leasing. Sadly, the Obama administration denied that, and now, of course, under this current political climate in the Trump administration, the pace of oil and gas leasing has reached a frenetic level. It is really insane. Becca just printed off these charts. So Becca, what's going on here?
So we've been keeping a tally of all the acreage that's been proposed for fracking by the Bureau of Land Management. In 2019 alone, there's 4.4 million acres that have been nominated. And so it's an insane amount. It's something we've been seeing increasing each year under the Trump administration. And these are our public lands that are being sacrificed.
Yeah, so just to put that into perspective, 4.4 million acres, that's around 4 times the size of Grand Canyon National Park. So an unbelievable amount of land that's being sacrificed to the oil and gas industry. And of course, places like Grand Canyon National Park are increasingly at risk because of these sales and committing these lands to oil and gas extraction.
Yeah.
You know, and in total, Becca, how many acres have been offered ever since Trump took office?
So it's about 8.1 million acres, starting in 2017,
Yeah.
once the lease sales began changing in terms of acreage and increasing when Trump took office. So 8.1 million acres, an insane amount, are public lands.
And
So-
what's crazy about it too, Becca, is that, you know, in total in the U.S. and mostly in the Western U.S., there's around 25 million acres under lease.
Yeah.
But only half of that acreage is actually producing any oil
Yes.
and gas, and that's based on the Bureau of Land Management's own statistics. So
Mhm.
they're selling off all this land, but there's no need to, and that's the you know, it makes it doubly insulting that the Trump
Yeah.
administration
Yeah.
is committing these lands to the industry. You know, we've been leading the charge to confront the federal oil and gas leasing program and to defend our public lands and our climate. And this year we had a pretty significant ruling. And Becca, maybe tell us a little more about that ruling and what it all means.
Yeah. So it was a fantastic ruling out of the DC District Court, but it applied to about 460,000 acres of public lands and minerals in Wyoming. And what the judge said was, you're breaking the law, BLM. You need to consider the direct, the indirect, which is also like the combustion greenhouse gas emissions, as well as the cumulative greenhouse gas emissions from not just, you know, the individual lease sales, but the lease sales occurring within the state and the lease sales occurring within the region and the nation. And so this is a really big ruling. The BLM has been piecemealing their oil and gas lease sales for years now. We've been pushing back, and winning in court. And it's clear as day now that the Bureau of Land Management has to consider cumulative climate impacts from its leasing program, which, as Jeremy mentioned earlier, it's 10% of the U.S.'s greenhouse gas emissions.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Basically, getting the Bureau of Land Management to account for the bigger picture. Because what happens is, let's say the BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, wants to sell some land in Northwest Colorado. They only look at the impacts of leasing in that part of Northwest Colorado, even though at the same time they may be leasing lands in Wyoming and Utah and other parts of the Western U.S. And so our lawsuit and our big court win this year was really about getting the Bureau of Land Management to account for the entirety of its oil and gas leasing program. And really that's what we're at, this kind of programmatic level of accountability, right?
yeah, and the key part of this win is it doesn't just apply to Wyoming, it also applies to Colorado and Utah, and conceivably all of the western states, and I mean the whole nation.
Yeah.
BLM has to account for its cumulative climate impacts. So,
And this is
big.
Yeah, it is big, and this is super important because getting the agency to at least acknowledge the totality of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with its oil and gas leasing program, you know, you reach a point where they just can't deny that it's a big deal and they need to do something about it. And that's been the whole strategy all along: is we need better analysis, we need better disclosure of these emissions so that we can spur some action, some real meaningful climate action. Now, unfortunately, under this administration, we're probably not likely to see climate action, but hopefully this win will set the stage for a future administration that could be more friendly and more progressive when it comes to climate.
yeah, and we're gearing up to build off of it. So, BLM, watch out, we're coming for you.
Yes. It's true. We are gearing up to bring another round of litigation challenging oil and gas leasing in several western states, and basically building off our big DC court win in March. And the aim is to keep the pressure on and basically not let a single acre go unchallenged, a single acre of oil and gas leasing go unchallenged. And you know, we're certainly we're on the front lines. We are certainly leading the charge. There's other groups that we're partnering with, Western Environmental Law Center, Center for Biological Diversity, Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance, Western Watersheds Project. We're certainly not alone, but it's definitely the on-the-ground groups. It really strikes me, it's the on-the-ground groups in the American West that are really leading the charge to keep our fossil fuels in the ground. And I guess, Becca, you know, tell me a little bit about, you know, as you're tracking these oil and gas lease sales, just tell us how does it go? Like, what are you looking for, and how do you coordinate and collaborate with other groups?
Yeah,
I mean,
that's
how
great.
does it all go?
Yeah, so we're monitoring about 5 different western states, sometimes more depending on how many lease sales are going on. But we're focusing on lease sales in Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico, Utah, and sometimes Nevada. And what we're doing is we're looking at the BLM's National Environmental Policy document, so their environmental analysis, and seeing whether or not they actually did what they're required to do by federal law. And frequently what we're seeing is they're not. So I recently just submitted a protest, which is an administrative appeal of the Colorado BLM's, or Bureau of Land Management's, September oil and gas lease sale. And I actually focused on parcels within the Royal Gorge field office, which is eastern Colorado, so not to get into field offices. And then we coordinated with the Center for Biological Diversity on the western parcels, and so, because there was a lot of wildlife issues with that. And for the eastern parcels, clean air issues and climate. And climate's always the underpinning of all of our comments, because that's why we do what we do, is to protect our climate. But when we can work with other groups, we work really well and coordinate our comments and divide and conquer, so that we can make sure every single lease sale is protested, because the Trump administration is not following the law. These aren't frivolous administrative appeals. As the DC District Court said, these are valid violations of the federal law. So
it's interesting. There was a Reuters story that came out earlier this year about how the amount of protests being filed has gone up considerably under the Trump administration, and in large part because of the work of Wild Earth Guardians. And of course, the administration was bemoaning this fact, saying, "Oh my God, Wild Earth Guardians is bogging down the process and causing delay." And from our perspective, we are just exercising our rights and trying to establish some degree of climate accountability. So we're actually pretty proud of the fact that the amount of protests has gone up. And it's true. More protests, more appeals are being filed than ever before over oil and gas leasing. And for one singular reason, it's for climate. Because people are finally realizing, you know what, this isn't just about protecting a special place or keeping oil and gas away from, for example, Bears Ears National Monument or Canyonlands National Park. Every acre matters when it comes to climate. And so even though we may be talking about like lands that aren't the most iconic, aren't the most beautiful, they still matter, and keeping fossil fuels in the ground still matters from a climate standpoint. So it's really a defining feature of Wild Earth Guardians' campaign to defend public lands from fracking. Even though we're concerned about clean air, we're concerned about wildlife, we're concerned about water impacts, we are first and foremost driven by climate. And I would say, more than any other group, Wild Earth Guardians is truly putting climate first when it's engaging on the oil and gas leasing program. Is that fair to say? Yeah, for sure. That's our defining issue, and it's something that's important in every single oil and gas lease parcel that's out there. The Bureau of Land Management would like to think that they're insignificant, but with the current climate science, we can't lease any single piece of land for fracking. Our world can't handle it. So we simply can't. And I just want to acknowledge we had another guest here, Willow the dog, show up. Willow the office dog hangs out with us every so often. She's dying to be on Facebook Live, so we'll let her in here. So Becca, how can people get involved? What can people do to help us in this campaign? We do have an online petition, but what more can people do? Yeah, that's a great question. So we're always looking for locals on the ground who are out in the field and are seeing these oil and gas leases. They know the lands. We're out in the field as much as we can, but we can't visit every single lease sale parcel. And so if you are seeing any of these lease parcels and thinking, wow, this is near my water well and this is a really important issue, definitely call us up, send us an email, reach out, let us know. That's fantastic. Also, submit your own comments and protests. The BLM probably gets sick of hearing from us, and so it would be great to hear from the rest of the American people. And you have unique issues to raise, and it doesn't have to be something that's incredibly complicated and legal. So definitely raise your voice, make yourself heard. Well, and that's really important to emphasize here, because we're talking about publicly owned minerals and public lands, and by public we mean American public. So whether you live in Maine or Southern California, you have a stake in how these lands and minerals are managed. This is an American issue, and so every American has the right to weigh in. You don't necessarily have had to have set foot in the area. You don't necessarily have to live in the area, climate affects us all. So frankly, everybody has a stake, and everybody should be able to express their voice and to speak out in this process. We often put out alerts, and we tell people when there's opportunities to submit comments or protests. It's a bit wonky on the web to find, if you're just searching for it. So if folks ever have questions or want to learn more about it, I mean, feel free to reach out to Becca or I. Our emails are B Fisher,
R Fisher.
R Fisher, sorry.
And that's Fisher, FISCHER at wildearthguardians.org.
Yeah. And then J Nichols, JNICHOLS at wildearthguardians.org. And our contact information is on our website too. Definitely go to our website, stay plugged in, sign up for our email list too. It's a great way to stay informed and on top of opportunities to help make a difference. The website's just wildearthguardians.org. It's a great resource. It's updated frequently. Great information on there. And also follow our social media too. Basically at Climate West, that's our handle for Facebook, for Twitter, and for Instagram. And we are constantly posting information and updates about what we're doing to defend public lands from fracking. And in fact, just this past Sunday, there was a big feature story in the Denver Post about leasing public lands in an area of Colorado called North Park, which is in north central Colorado. Beautiful mountain park area, and at the core of this area is this landscape is the Arapahoe National Wildlife Refuge, which is home to the imperiled sage-grouse, white-tailed prairie dogs, and a whole host of other critters. And yet the oil and gas industry is literally creeping up to the doorstep of this wildlife refuge, and it just emphasizes that there's so much at stake here. Leasing public lands, yes, climate matters, but when we're talking about sage-grouse, beautiful landscapes, clean water, wildlife habitat, it just all leads to one conclusion, which is we have to keep it in the ground, right?
Yeah, entirely. And I mean, we're already seeing postings for oil and gas lease sales for 2020. And some of those, the parcels in New Mexico, are going to be, again, unless we can help it, but right near Carlsbad Caverns National Park, just south of it. So your parks are at risk, your climate is at risk, of course, but these areas, no place is sacred. So.
Yeah, that's so true. Under this administration, no place is sacred.
Yeah.
And they're relentless, really. And the fact that they're already proposing lease sales for 2020, this is it's a runaway train, basically, right? I mean, that's how it feels to me. But there's still hope. There's hope in the sense that because they're putting oil and gas first, they are ignoring the law. They're ignoring the will of the public, and we are holding them accountable to making changes. I think of going back to last week, we talked about our campaign to defend the Greater Chaco region from fracking. This is Greater Chaco region is in northwest New Mexico, and at its core is Chaco Canyon National Historical Park. And we've been trying to thwart leasing in that area for the past couple of years, and with a lot of success. The Bureau of Land Management has crazily proposed leasing within miles of Chaco Canyon, and we have helped galvanize an uproar of people power and also political opposition from New Mexico's congressional delegation, and we've managed to pressure the Bureau of Land Management to back down and to not sell those lands. So even under this administration, we are mustering up enough power to convince them that they shouldn't move forward.
Yeah,
which gives us some hope, right?
Yeah, we have a great, while I'm doing a lot of the legal and administrative commenting, we've got a great organizer down in New Mexico, Rebecca Sobel, and she's organizing protests, like in-person protests, not administrative appeals, at the Bureau of Land Management's office in Santa Fe. There's a New Mexico oil and gas lease sale, the September lease sale, which is coming up tomorrow, and I think we'll be showing up down there to protest offering these parcels.
Tune into the Wildlife Guardians Facebook page tomorrow.
Stay tuned.
We're going to have a big event. We're going to have people showing up. We're going to be protesting out in person, literally protesting.
Yeah. So actual protesting, not administrative appeals. But there's all sorts of stuff going on. And one other quick thing, I mean, if you're not a member of Wild Earth Guardians, contribute to our efforts, because we've got a lot of really innovative legal challenges, and those take resources. And so anything you contribute would help us make sure that we keep our public lands protected, protect our climate, our water, our wildlife, all of the above.
Yeah, it really, I mean, Becca's certainly leading the charge for Wild Earth Guardians, but it really is a team effort. I'm helping her out. We have attorneys, staff attorneys who are assisting us, Samantha Rascavage-Bars and Daniel Timmons. In fact, Daniel is filed suit for us last month over leasing in southeast New Mexico's greater Carlsbad area, which is an area facing very intense pressure from the oil and gas industry. But we are trying to hold the line, and Guardian staff attorneys are there on the front lines. So, and then Rebecca in Santa Fe with her campaigning, and Rebecca was on last week's Facebook Live event, so check that out if you haven't already. You can get the latest from Rebecca. But yeah, I feel like we're mustering up some incredible power here, and that even though this administration is frustrating to say the least, angering, it's disappointing for anybody who loves public lands just to see that how the oil and gas industry is taking precedence over everything. It's sickening. But there's so much room for hope, and seems like we're making progress, even if these lease sales are happening, but we're setting the stage, I think, for big changes. And we're hearing from some of the not to get into campaigns, because Wildlife Guardians can't take positions on campaigns, but it's fascinating to see that some of the Democratic candidates for president right now, even they're starting to talk about an end to the federal oil and gas leasing program, and at the start a moratorium on leasing public lands for fracking. So we're really encouraged to see that idea and that concept is being recognized as a necessary step toward meaningful climate action by legitimate presidential candidates.
Yeah, I mean, if one thing there is to say that's good about the Trump administration is galvanized us, and the law is on our side, as the DC District Court made clear. We're finding that the administration is making a lot of mistakes when they're rushed to sell and frack our lands for oil and gas industry, and so I think the law's on our side, the people power is on our side, and we are set up to make some major changes.
And increasingly, it seems like the politics are likely to be on our side.
Yeah, in the future, hopefully.
So hopefully the administration will change. Well, this is so great, and thank you so much for tuning in and viewing. Again, I'm Jeremy Nichols. I'm the Climate Energy Program Director for Wild Earth Guardians, and with me is Becca Fisher, Climate Energy Program Attorney. So next week we're gonna continue. So we do this weekly, and this is our third one, and they seem to be going really well. We're getting lots of positive feedback. We're having a lot of fun with it. We're doing deep dives into the campaigns that we're engaging on, and hopefully sharing with you a bit more perspective, a deeper perspective on. We just got a shout out here from Dan Kowalski. Join Wild Earth Guardians.
Yes.
Thanks, Dan. So that's awesome. Thank you so much. And next week we're going to talk about coal in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming, which is the largest coal-producing region of the nation. But coal is collapsing. In case you didn't know, the coal industry is dying. And it's dying in a big way up there. And we're going to talk a little bit about what that means for energy security and also just economic transition in Wyoming and in our nation. So tune in for that. And then every week, we do this every week, Wednesday at 1 p.m. Mountain Time. We're going to keep it up. We're having fun. This is great. Thanks for people who checked in with us today. And if you have questions or have feedback for us in the meantime, feel free to email us. Again, it's rfisher
@wildearthguardians.org.
And Fisher with a C.
Fisher with a C, yes, FISCHER.
And then J Nichols, JNICHOLS @wildearthguardians.org. Feel free to email us, message us on Facebook, message us on Twitter. We're totally available, and we just would love to hear whatever feedback you have, however we can improve this, and we're going to keep it up. So I guess that's a wrap for today.
Yeah.
Thank you so much,
Until
everybody,
next
for
time.
joining.